Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this conversation in honor of Juneteenth. I'm Anthony Foxx, the Chief Policy Officer here at Lyft. This conversation is an expression of our commitment. We at Lyft have been and remain committed to using this platform and Juneteenth to reflect on where we have been, where we are, and what can be done to usher in tangible and lasting changes that will make our teammates, our company, our communities, and our world even better. So for us, Juneteenth is a day to listen, a day to reflect, and we wanted to share this conversation with all of you, members of our extended Lyft family, our teammates, the drivers on the platform, and our community partners. We will be celebrating by partnering with organizations around the nation, like the National Juneteenth Foundation, March for Us, and the San Francisco African American Chamber of Commerce, by volunteering and donating ride credits to support their Juneteenth programming. To provide some background on the history of Juneteenth, the Emancipation Proclamation was formally issued by President Abraham Lincoln on January 1st, 1863, declaring all enslaved persons in the Confederacy to be free. This executive action was resisted in the South until the end of the Civil War, which labored on for another 2 years until General Robert Lee's surrender on April 9, 1865. Now, from that point forward, the fighting really didn't end. Skirmishes continued in the West through June 2nd. And on June 18, 1865, General Granger of the Union Army arrived in Texas with 2,000 Union troops. And on the very next day, he issued an order announcing the total emancipation of all Confederate slaves. However, this action did not actually end slavery. There were still slaves in the Union territories, and it took a 13th Amendment, which was ratified in December 1865, and a further proclamation on December 18, 1865, to do that. There's so much more history to know, to learn, as we reflect on Juneteenth and why Juneteenth stands as a milestone in American history. And so many of these dates still bear reflection. Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and too many others. This year, we've continued to witness the disproportionate impact of COVID-19, of joblessness, and systemic inequities on Black Americans. We've also mourned the death of Dante Wright and Adam Toledo, and we witnessed the trial of Derrick Chauvin for the murder of George Floyd. I asked us this question last year, and it's a question we will continue to ask. How do we achieve fundamental and lasting changes that line up with the professed ideals of American democracy and economic opportunity? This year, we've continued to witness attempts to suppress voting rights, which we're going to hear more about today from our speakers. At Lyft, we continue to believe in the values of American democracy and the fundamental right of every citizen to vote. That's why for years, Lyft has run our Lyft Up voting access programs to provide access to hundreds of thousands of rides to voters every election year, from the primaries to the general election. While our efforts to provide transportation access we also need a strong piece of federal legislation to counter the numerous campaigns nationwide to restrict voting rights. That's why we support the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, which would provide federal voting protections for everyone. At Lyft, we will continue to look for ways to make access to transportation less of a barrier to voting, and speaking out against voting restrictions that we believe will make it harder for Americans to participate in their own democracy. At Lyft, we've long partnered with community and civil rights organizations committed to economic mobility within communities of color, both at the local and national level. In 2020, for example, we launched the Lyft Up Access Alliance, partnering with organizations like the NAACP and the Black Women's Roundtable, both of whom you'll hear from today, to help eliminate transportation as a barrier to economic mobility for Black communities by committing to provide access to 1.5 million free rides and discounted rides for over 5 years to support communities of color. In 2020 alone, we estimate we provided access to over 1 million free or discounted rides to communities of color through our Lift Up programs, including but not limited to Jobs Access, COVID 19 support, and Access Alliance. And this year, we launched our Vote Lift Up vaccine access program to provide access to free and discounted rides for the NAACP, Black Women's Roundtable, and over 100 other community partners to help community members get access to rides so they could get to their vaccination appointments. We've also increased our support for Black drivers and launched the Know Your Rights campaign with the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives and the American Civil Liberties Union to provide drivers with the information about how to protect their rights in the event they are pulled over by law enforcement. Now, these are just some of the ways we're committed to being part of the solution. I'm now going to turn it over to our head of national policy engagement at Lyft, Heather Foster, who will be moderating today's conversation.
Well, thank you so much, Anthony, for that introduction. I just want to say hi to everyone across the company. I know we have been remote for so long now, and I look forward to us all reuniting in different ways over the next 6 months. But I'm excited today to have two wonderful speakers join me for a conversation about Juneteenth. We've heard a lot about this holiday. At Lyft, it is going to be a day that we have off to reflect. And so today we're going to talk about this purpose of Juneteenth, talk about some of the issues that are going on. And we have the honor of having two of the leaders out here on the forefront of so many important issues. They represent organizations that have been pushing the needle for justice for Black Americans for over 100 of years now. And so I'm really excited. I have had the wonderful opportunity to work both with Melanie Campbell and Derrick Johnson in a variety of different ways. And I have seen their incredible leadership. And so I'm excited to have a conversation today with these two incredible leaders. We'll talk a little bit about the work, what inspires them, and we'll take some questions that we got from the Lyft audience. And so we'll be able to do a little question and answer as well. And so without further ado, I would love to do a little introduction of both of these wonderful leaders. We will start first with Melanie Campbell. Melanie is the president and CEO of the National Coalition on Black Civic Participation. She is also the convener of the Black Women's Roundtable. Melanie is recognized as one of the hardest working servant leaders. I have seen that in real time in today's civil rights, women's rights, and social justice movement. Campbell serves as an advisor to U.S. President, congressional members, corporate, labor, nonprofit executives, philanthropists, faith leaders, and others on so many critical issues that face and impact Black America. Campbell currently serves as the Sephora Racial Equity Advisory Council, Lyft Safety Advisory Council, Wealth Segmented Authorities National Social Action Commission, chairwoman of the Board of Sisters Lead. She is featured in the Washingtonian as Washington, D.C.'s most influential people in February. She's a veteran coalition builder, and she's built so many highly successful civic engagement campaigns across states across the United States. She also hosts the annual BWR Women of Power National Summit during Women's History Month, and she's regularly featured in Offense and USA Today, Washington Post, and Washington Informer, along as making a lot of regular appearances on CNN, MSNBC, and CBS. Melanie, why don't you introduce yourselves and just say hi to everyone today?
First of all, Heather, thank you for the invitation and the family. It is just a pleasure to sit here and be here today with my brother in the movement, Derrick Johnson. So just looking forward to the dialogue today. And thank you just for the invitation.
You are so very welcome. Derrick Johnson. Derrick is the president and CEO of the NAACP, a title he has held since October of 2017. President Johnson formerly served as vice chairman of the NAACP National Board of Directors, as well as state president for the Mississippi State Conference of the NAACP. A longstanding member and leader of the NAACP, Mr. Johnson has helped guide the association through a period of re-envisioning and reinvigoration. Under his leadership, the NAACP has taken on efforts as the 2018 Log Out Facebook campaign, the Jamestown Partnership marking the 400th year enslaved in Africans first touched the shores of America, the 2020 We Are Done Dying campaign, exposing many of the inequalities embedded in the American healthcare system, and most recently, the victorious 2020 Supreme Court lawsuit, NAACP versus Trump, which prevents the Trump administration from rescinding the Deferred Action for Children's Childhood Arrivals program for millions of young immigrants. President Johnson also continues to be on the front lines of some of the most pressing civil rights issues of our time, and we have seen his work as the NAACP has expanded over the past several years. Born in Detroit, Mr. Johnson attended Tougaloo College. He then received his JD from South Texas College of Law in Houston, Texas. Derrick, go ahead and introduce yourself here today.
Thank you, Heather, and thank all of the Lyft employees for this opportunity as I look forward to having this conversation with my friend Melanie.
Great. So let's go ahead and jump in. You know, I've had the awesome opportunity to work with you all on civil rights issues. And we have seen over the past year how critical these issues are. You know, this time last year, when we saw that, you know, there were so many activists in the streets talking about these issues after the death of George Floyd, we're in a little bit of a different place this year in 2021. We saw the verdict of the case. And so we now are kind of in a different phase. So talk to me, Melanie, a little bit about what Juneteenth means to you. How does it really truly represent freedom? And just talk a little bit about the past year. Name one kind of milestone moment that to you really brought you back to why Juneteenth is so important and why it's important that we celebrate it every year.
Thank you, Heather, again for the invitation and the question. Well, I'll start with the end of that, right? Juneteenth itself is something that I think that's really important in a time where history is being tries to be rewritten, and that we learn from that history. And we think about Juneteenth and that whole year where it took that long for the folks in Texas, the slaves to be knew that they were free. And so the realities of that is something we should never forget. There's so many other milestones. You know, we think about Tulsa massacre, things that when you have a time where you have in many states now wanting to dismiss the history of African Americans in this country and don't want facts to be part of what people learn in school. So we're in a really interesting time in that. But over the past year, I think the biggest thing for me that stands out to me is the 2020 election, quite frankly, right? That when we had 4 years of an administration that was the most lawless administration, and it's facts, not partisan, in my lifetime, I'm sure, in many of our lifetimes, who has brought this democracy to the point of where it is still in moments of peril as we are sitting here on this phone call. So I think that what was most important to me was that our people showed up. We knew Black and brown folks showed up, young people showed up, those who believe in inclusion and that this not that this democracy is perfect, but truly that folks stood up. And so that was one of the biggest things that I think was important. And all of us did what we had to do in the midst of a pandemic, that folks showed up and showed out and turned out in record numbers across this country. So that was the one big thing. And in the midst of course, this COVID-19 pandemic that we all are still dealing with today.
So you really think that power of voting that we saw last fall is such a significant moment?
Yes, indeed.
Derrick, talk to us a little bit about what you see as some of the challenges that Black Americans are facing in our current time. So, you know, as I mentioned, I think there's been this focus, and particularly when we get to Juneteenth, it's like people are asking themselves, what can I do, right? But as we head into this year, the second half of this year at this point, what do you think are some of the greatest challenges facing the community?
Great question. So, picking up a little on your last question to answer the current question, most important thing for me last year was the forced stopping through quarantine as a result of the global pandemic. And that forced stopping allowed many of us to understand how fragile our democracy is, begin to elevate the concern after viewing George Floyd's murder, begin to question how our systems would work if, in fact, we didn't fully engage in November's election, and begin to question the inequities that have been a problem of in this nation for not only decades but centuries. That stopping point forced many of us to recalibrate how we do what we do when we did it. It allowed for that burst of energy we've seen across the country when individuals took to the streets of all communities, of all demographics, of all genders, to begin to rally behind the value proposition about the value of a person's life, of value of a community's life. And so as we look forward and continue to take stock, our democracy is still fragile. What we're looking at now is we are on a powder keg that can explode in a negative way like we see in January 6th, or we can do some deep repair to try to fix not only the inequities, but bring people out of this notion of fallacy they are getting from social media platforms. If we are unable to contain the super spreader of misinformation on social media, we're going to continue to devolve into a level of anarchy that none of us would like to see. And so moving forward, we have to recognize that we're one nation. We all have an obligation to build and repair our democracy. We got to address inequities that continue to exist. The social construct of race must be cast out. The caste system that we've always lived in must be addressed in order for us to really project a future that we would like to see, because if we don't, we're going to end up in a place that none of us would have ever expected. January 6th was a wake-up call. The real question is, are we now woke enough to begin to address the systemic problems that are the undercurrent within our democracy before we no longer have a democracy?
Thank you. I think as we think about that, right, I know we have, as I mentioned, employees across the country, across North America. We also have a lot of our drivers tuning in today. Talk to us a little bit about what each of your organizations have been doing to address some of those issues. So for example, Melanie, talk a little bit about the work that you're doing and potentially if people want to get involved, how they could.
Thank you. One of the key things, and Derrick, really listening to you talk about last year and the depths of what we all are addressing or still living with is also to deal with us the mental health impact of what we have endured and are still in many ways enduring behind COVID-19. So part of what we've been doing on that level is to really help folks get the vaccines, right? So many of our states are organizing pop-ups around the country, especially in southern states, to help folks help us get across that finish line with just getting the vaccine and understanding the challenges and fears people still have. And although we know the numbers are going down, it's still too much happening when it comes to the African American community. So that's one thing. And that those who are listening out there, if you have not gotten your vaccine shot, get it. Okay, I'm a survivor of it. It's not the flu. That's why I just tell folks it's not the flu. So make sure that you do that so you can protect yourself and your family. So that's one thing. We are working in coalition with Derrick and a lot of and some of our colleagues on really pushing the kinds of policies that need to be implemented in order to address, for instance, the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act is a big issue for us, and we're pushing the fact that we have our voting rights are under the backlash to what happened in 2020 is the backlash of voter suppression laws being passed all over this country. So we're pushing for the federal legislation for the federal remedy that we need in the For the People Act that's in the Senate right now, as well as what's is still in the House side of the Congress, the John Lewis Voting Rights Restoration Act. So really pushing the federal policies that are needed. And for African Americans, it is critical and vital that that takes place. But that our voting rights are under attack across this country. So for African Americans, it has always been attacks on our rights, and we've had to utilize the federal government to help us protect those rights. And right now, we've not had that. And so those are some of the things. Of course, with Black Women's Roundtable, I can share a little more later. If they want to get involved, just they can Google National Coalition at NCBCP or Black Women's Roundtable, especially those two programs, and we can organization program, and follow us on social media and get involved. Do something. Do something.
No, we have a lot of people who want to do something. So thank you for that. Derrick, love to hear from you on the same topic.
Getting involved is really important. Our website, NAACP.org. One of the things that I've recognized in doing this type of work for a long time, people use many vehicles for voice when you talk about social justice. So there are multiple organizations to get engaged with, and that NAACP is one. But that engagement should be focused around how do we bring people together? How do we build communities? And how do we hold policymakers accountable to really fulfill the needs and interests of our Constitution to ensure that all people are treated equally? Equal protection under the law should be afforded regardless of one's disposition. And more importantly, begin to push away from many of the false narratives that we're beginning to hear. For your drivers, for example, monitoring what you're listening to on talk radio, making sure that what you are listening to is forward conversation, not maligning people. We started during this time of last year a campaign called Stop Hate for Profit, where we realized that one of the major social media platforms actually was profiting from soliciting and allowing ad purchases by racial hate groups and white supremacist activity. That resulted in individuals being harmed. For example, they will place the ad, and when the ad is there, it will be partnered next to a corporate, a major corporation. People then click on it, they start recruiting, they start radicalizing. And in one scenario, it ended in the death of an individual who's a federal official in the Bay Area. We have to not only be involved with organizations, but we have to monitor the information that we're taking in. So social media have democratized media like we have never seen before. Any person with a smart device is now a reporter. But those reporters who are individuals come from perspectives that are not healthy to individuals, not healthy to communities, not healthy to society. And so the number one thing I tell people, make sure you really vet your news source, your information source, especially with the content that you're watching on television, the content you're listening to on the radio, and the content that you are reviewing on your social media platforms. That's so important because misinformation is serious. Foreign nations are interfering in how people think in our country, and that we are looking at the erosion of the guardrails that have protected us in the past.
Thank you, Derrick. So those are some great ways for us to think about ways of getting involved with each of your organizations. I want to shift a little bit now to, Melanie, you mentioned some key legislation. And so at Lyft, after George Floyd, we kind of took a step back. We did a lot of listening to our employees. We did a lot of listening to community members. We talked to members of your organizations. We talked to our drivers. And so one issue that continued to come up, of course, was everything surrounded George Floyd, but then also what can we do to end discrimination, right? So uh, internally, we started a working group to look at what are some things that we can do with the platform. We thought about ways we can improve it internally, but also externally, working with the right partners. So when you think about the death of George Floyd and how companies and how also institutions are changing the way they operate, Derek, talk to me a little bit about what really are some key things that you think companies should be doing, and what else can we do to kind of think about the memory, but also really confront a lot of the systematic racism that is out there.
I think corporate America should start inside and then work out. Much of how culture evolved and is managed in America is through corporate culture and responsibility. One, are you allowing yourself the best talent that's both diverse and informed to be around tables of decision making, whether it's board, C-suite, or supervisory level, so that the outcome of those decisions truly reflect not only the customer base, but the culture we're trying to build. Two, how are you utilizing your resources to support and further a culture that's more positive and supportive of a healthy democracy? And then thirdly, are you as a corporation putting profit above people, or recognizing that profit should be aligned with people interest, health, and ability to progress through this society? So important. After January 6th, several corporations made pledges that they wouldn't do certain things. And we're monitoring that now. We're monitoring because we want to say, okay, this is what you said you was going to do, but this is what you're actually doing. After George Floyd, many corporations stepped up and began to acknowledge that structural racism actually exists. Those barriers have been persistent and pervasive across the country, and it has impeded not only African Americans, but other communities, but especially African Americans. What role are you going to play in corporate America to try to reduce and eliminate those structural barriers that have been put in place, and to ensure that your workforce understand the value that you're standing in, because you've actually established the value and you're promoting that value of having a healthy society and an inclusive community by practicing that value, by having a healthy corporate environment and an inclusive employment opportunities at all levels of existence.
Thanks for that answer. I think that it are definitely some of the things that we've thought about. Melanie, when we think about what's going on in the community, so you mentioned vaccine access, we've partnered with the organization around it, but what are some other things? At Lyft, we're focused on transportation equity. So that's kind of the way that we think about how we attack some of these things that are happening systematically across the country. What else do you think can be done to address some of the systematic racism that we see publicly, particularly in individual communities where we have a lot of our drivers are from, and where also a lot of our employees, when they wake up, what are some things that we can do in community?
Thank you, Heather. I do want to step back and say, I think from your national level, from your level, from your corporate level, also speak up, speak out. I mentioned those legislation that's out there. We need corporate America to speak up about the need for voting rights, the need for policing reform, if you so inclined, because that matters. It does make a difference, and so the time is now to speak up. To speak up and weigh in. So I'd be remiss if I didn't say that that's also something that is very tangible when you talk about dealing with issues of systemic racism, structural racism. The voter suppression is very much along color lines, and in some ways even also economic lines, and as well as along lines of impacting young people in this country. So now is the time to speak up. to make sure that your voice is heard on these very critical policy issues. I think on a local level, your audience that is listening, your employees that are listening, to get in. The Derrick has said it a couple of times too, and I agree. Get involved. You have to get involved. A lot of what's happening on a state level, I think it's like we all have a role to play. You don't have to be an organizer or activist. You are a citizen of the United States, or you are a person who lives in the United States. You have a voice, so use that voice and speak up wherever you are, because in a lot of these states, especially the voting rights attacks, are happening on a state level. So just speak up, get involved, call your congressperson, call your elected officials, your governor, your legislatures, and let them know you believe in inclusion and you believe in saving this democracy. And I think right now that's one of the couple of biggest things that we can do, and folks to get involved in.
Okay. Well, I think, another thing that I really wanted to touch on, is voting rights. So at Lyft, as Melanie mentioned, as a company, we have spoken about voting rights because we have a voter access program. And so we have done partnerships with both of your organizations. Derrick, talk to us a little bit about what is the state of play right now in terms of voting rights. We've heard news about what's going on in Texas and Georgia, and then also on the national level. So give us a little bit of an overview of what's going on and what else you think we can do, particularly as we look at how the John Lewis Voting Rights Act is.
This past November was a demonstration of more people voting this last year than have voted in recent memory, which is a good thing. Opening up access for a good democracy. You think of it this way. In Australia, 96% of the eligible voters participate in their elections. In Canada, about 92%. In Germany, around 93%. We celebrate a high voter turnout if we hit the 60 to 65% mark of voter turnout. I mean, 65% is like huge. We should have a representative democracy. Our goal should be to increase the number of eligible voters who participate so that we can have a true representation of the citizens who are entitled by right under our Constitution to fully engage in our democracy. And in many cases, based on recent reporting, we've always known this, everyday working Americans pay more than their share in taxes, but not always having an opportunity to have a voice in how those tax dollars are utilized. And much of the debate is about who gets taxed, who's not taxed, and how those tax dollars are used. And the tools of engagement to kind of suppress the vote is oftentimes cloaked under arguments based on fear. And some of the biggest fear arguments is on race or religion or morality or region. And so we have to make sure we increase voter turnout and not allow states like Texas or Georgia, but in effect, close to 40 states who are now adopting measures to try to suppress the vote, to tighten the pipeline of those who can actually engage and have their voices heard. We've seen this happen after the inauguration of President Biden, as if there was something wrong with our system. Over 60 plus lawsuits filed. NAACP, we intervened or filed 34 suits in counter of the lawsuits that were filed. And in all of those lawsuits that was filed, none of them have come back to show voter fraud, although there's this ongoing narrative that somehow that the election was stolen. And the legacy of this country, what that means is that the right people voices wasn't heard, quote, as opposed to all of the citizens. And there's an effort to say, well, only our votes are legitimate, and these other voters, they're not legitimate because they don't look like us. They don't come from our culture, and they don't believe as we do. We have to stop that. In addition to that, there is movement in Congress to measures, HR1 or SR1 now, and HR4 or SR4 now. One is dealing with making sure that our election systems are upgraded, there's transparency, and corporate and individual contributions, making sure we put in place opportunities for all citizens to vote early, because to have in some states all of your rights to be contained within 12 hours during a workday. Some people are unable to vote, so you have early voting, making sure that one of the number one vote suppressor measures, voter registration, is same day, as opposed to filling out an application to exercise your right, which is illogical to say the least. But we're also accustomed to doing it. We think, well, what's wrong with voter registration? Well, why would you have to register to vote when you're a legitimate voter? Because the technology can say whether or not you have the can vote or not. So why you have to fill out a job application to do so? HR 1 began to address that, allowing the citizens of DC to fully engage as citizens, so they can talk about how their tax dollars are utilized, because they pay more in taxes per capita than half the states in the country. That's HR 1. HR 4 will restore the protections of voting rights in states with a proven history, or jurisdiction with proven histories of seeking to suppress the vote. That's stuck in the Senate during a time when states like Georgia is now trying to tighten the reins of voting so they can suppress votes, understanding that elections are won by inches, not miles. And so if you can peel off 1, 2, 3% of voters, you can control the outcome of the election. But that's not how our system is designed. That voters, citizens, are to select our elected officials and policymakers. Elected officials and policymakers should not be allowed to select what voters they want to vote for them. And so that's the state of where we are. I hate to give you that long answer for the short question, but we have to continue to fight to ensure not only our democracy survives, but it actually works for all eligible citizens across the country.
No, that answer is not too long. It is, a complex issue. People hear different sound bites all the time about what's happening with voting rights. And so I know your organization has been on the front lines of this issue. And so it's very helpful to get the context and hear about the different types of legislation and the impacts that we could potentially see in upcoming elections. And so thank you for that answer, Derrick. Melanie, I don't know if you wanted to add anything else, because I know you have also been very vocal on voting rights.
No, I think Derrick brought it home. And it's again, just get involved. And now is the time. This is happening as we speak, right? The debate is going on about it. And if there's going to be a change, it's going to happen now. And it's going to happen because the people spoke up. And those of us who believe in inclusion for everybody, not just the few. And that's really all we're talking about. It's not a partisan issue. It's like we all believe that in this democracy, and it's up to us in this generation to really step up to the plate. Otherwise, we could wake up one day and we don't have a democracy. And that is just where we really are. It is not a fear mongering. It is a fact. And so whatever folks think about whatever side of the aisle you stand on. I think I wish we had more than two parties, quite frankly, but we don't. But right now we have a situation where our very core of this country is still being pulled apart. Derrick talked about it, about where we don't have a common sharing in this country of being able to have a difference of opinion. Disagreement. It's either us or them, and it's all those people and otherizing people. And so there's a reckoning that's taking place in this country. And what happened last year with George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and all of those things just lifted that up, right? And so that's all I say is just get involved, stay involved, and make sure your voice is heard out.
So as I mentioned earlier, I wanted to make sure that we got some questions directly for you from our Lyft employee base. And so our employee resource group is called Lyft Forward, and that has all of the members and employees who identify as Black here at the company. So they had a question that they wanted to give to you all. And I think there is really an interest, and particularly in kind of thinking through what is the message that you would share with many of us here at the company as we look to build a more inclusive workplace? I'd love to hear from both of you on this answer, on this question.
So I will simply say, be open, be kind, and be patient. Be open to learn different perspective and to hear how people receive and interpret information. Be kind, because some people may not see the world the same way you do because of their life experiences brought them to the place that you're gathering in ways in which everyone can learn from each other. And have a sense of grace as people are working through where they are. As you would like people to have grace with you as you work through where you are. That's called loving thy neighbor and respecting our neighbor and understanding that we all ended up in the place that we are in for different reasons, and we are in a season that we are in to learn from one another. So be kind, be open, and have grace for one another.
Melanie?
Amen, Derrick. I say amen, 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 and amen. Very, very important. And as I was stated, just stay involved. Just make sure you don't turn your power over to someone else. Each of us have a vote, or if you can't vote, somebody who can, right? So get involved. I think that's very much the message that I like to continue to lend to your team of folks out there who are listening. It's just stay involved. And now is the time. Don't vote and let somebody else make decisions for you. You have the power in your hands. And I close with what my brother said, that we have to listen to each other. We have to learn from each other and respect each other at the end of the day. And we don't have to agree, but we can respect each other and know that we all have, that if you look at each other from that we all are human, a part of this human experience, and we all want to see good happen to our communities and for our communities, and push back on those people who are around you that need to be pushed back on. Sometimes that's our family members. Be real, that we have to push back on and make sure that folks are getting the right information, factual information. And fact matters, truth matters. It matters that we have the information that is true and factual. So just thank you so much for the opportunity, and hope something I said was beneficial to this conversation today.
Well, thank you. I think these are fantastic answers. The second one that kind of came from a lot of our employees was really something you touched on considerably, Melanie, is how to be an ally. So it is a word that has, of course, come up a lot. It came up a lot because of when everyone, as Derrick earlier mentioned, there was this kind of standstill last year where the pandemic had everyone kind of look at this issue. And so I know, as I mentioned, I started this racial equity working group internally, and many people came to the table who had not worked on these issues before. And the first question they asked was, how do I be an ally? And so I think that is something that people are continuously, I know I still receive questions regularly on it. And, in your perspective, particularly seeing the work that you're doing, how can people really truly be an ally?
I'll go ahead there. I would say one of the things that I mentioned is talk to the people in your circle, right? Because changing hearts and minds, depending on how that's done, I think that's important that we do that. It's part of the reason in this country that racism, in my opinion, some reason that it still exists is because we've not done the hard work. You say we wanted to have a conversation, but it goes a little deeper than that, and we have to challenge the people who are in our circles that you hear the bigotry, you hear it, challenge it, right? So we can start right there in your circle, systemically. I think the issues that we've discussed already, and much more, right, to deal with those elements of inequities and racial inequities in this country is everybody's business, right? And if we can address some of those things in this country and change that, it's all the better for the nation. And so it's not about just helping those people; it's about helping each other and helping our nation be much better country than it is right now, and can be that much better for all of us.
Mm-hmm.
Derrick, would you like to add anything?
Sure. Quick story. Earlier this week, I did a panel conversation with 2 members from the cast of Pose, facilitated by Alfonso David, who's head of HRC. And the conversation was really productive because the question that's been posed here, I have to pose the same question for the trans community. Because within the African American culture, we have not always been kind to the LGBTQ community, particularly trans women. And so in that, the discovery of figuring out how do I become a better ally to the trans community, what I recognize is I need to listen. I needed to understand perspective and pain and past trauma. I need to navigate through that in a way in which I don't cause any additional harm, pain, or trauma. I also needed to, before act, check, make sure that I am in a space where I'm the right person to respond or how I'm responding, to make sure that I am empowering when it should be someone from the trans community that's speaking on an issue that's important to them, that I'm inclusive, so that when we are doing things, that there are many perspectives. The African American community, we are a very diverse community. And in that, making sure we are able to lift up the many, 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 many perspectives that represent our community, and be intentional about it. So that is not something that's an afterthought or something that I'm just trying to appease at the moment because it's a certain time of the year, like Black History Month or Pride Month, but it's a part of how I operationalize my thoughts and my action to be as receptive as possible to all the genius that come to the table. And me recognizing that each one of us come to the table with uniqueness. And our uniqueness is our genius. And if we really want to benefit from the collective genius of who we are as a people, we have to respect the uniqueness that come in the form of different people. And so to be an ally is to appreciate and recognize that uniqueness, not try to fit anyone into a predisposed box or a concept of what you think they are or they should be or how they can operationalize in a particular way, but actually allow that genius to shine through as we explore solutions to big problems together. Because we all have a piece of a solution, none of us have the total solution.
I love that, Derrick. And not only did I just finish watching the last episode of Pose, so that is very timely. But I really enjoyed the piece that you said about us all being a part of the solution, because I think that is, it goes back to the heart of my question, where I think many of our employees, as I mentioned, and our drivers and our partners show up every day and say, okay, how can we be a part of this, right? How can we really see some movement? And we know that change is not always fast. And that's one of the things that I share continuously, is that it does take time. So I really enjoyed both of your answers on this, and I think it'll be very helpful as we all process this. And so to close things out, I want to talk a little bit about what you all are both doing for Juneteenth. I know my friends and I in the Bay Area have put together what we like to call a Black Joy picnic for the day, so that we can talk. We found this all to be very healing last year in the midst of everything that was going on, was to really celebrate the joy that our community can often pull together so well. And so I'd love to hear from both of you about what you have planned.
Well, unfortunately, I have I can't what I'm planning, because I don't control my calendar. Iris control everything I do, so I will have to ask her, what am I doing on Juneteenth? And what's fascinating, my chief of staff here is, and my wife, they get on their huddle calls about what I'm doing. And so I just take orders and I do it.
All right, I'll have to check in with Eris then. We'll check in with her on what you're doing. Melanie?
I'm in Florida, in my home state, and so I'm actually participating with a Juneteenth event that our Florida affiliate is leading with Solange Benton and the AME Church and Florida Rights Restoration Coalition. So they're going to be in Men's with the big bus. They're going to be registering voters and giving out PPEs and all kinds of things. And all I have to do is show up and just thank everybody for coming. But I will be there to just try to help celebrate and doing voter registration and other kinds of things, doing clemency updates for folks and employment opportunities. So they're doing this festival in my hometown. So we're honored to be at home to participate in that.
I just looked at the calendar. I was wrong. Iris already put it in there. I am doing something called Quarantunes. It was created by individuals because of the quarantine to celebrate the arts. And so NAACP is the featured organization for this month on June 19th to do Quarantunes. So Heather, we will send you an invite and hope you can join us.
Fantastic. I look forward to joining. And so I just want to thank you all so much again for joining me today for this conversation, sharing your experience, your expertise on these issues, and challenging us to really think about how we continue to stay involved and move forward in this fight for justice. And so thank you all so much for joining me today. And I look forward to continuing to work with you here at Lyft.
Thank you. Thank you, Heather. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for your leadership. Thanks, Derrick. Good to be here with you.
Take care, everybody. Thank you, Melanie.
Thank you.